So back to invasions. This is turn 11. Thought I had a burned out light here, and I pulled one of these fluorescent things up, or whatever they are, to replace it. And it turns out whatever was in there just wasn't in tight enough. So I'm gonna leave this one up here. I'm sure this is like the one room where I use a lot of fluorescent or a lot of incandescent lights, and I probably have too many. I mean, like I have this one that's empty or that's dead, and I could take the incandescent out of there and replace it or something. Yeah, I know. I gotta go into so much detail on every fucking thing, whether it's got anything to do with the game or not. So I started the status phase. And I flipped this card up to remind me to use it on one of the blue kingdoms, which is going to be either the Ostrogoths or someone else. There was someone else it applied to. The Burgundy. One of those two is probably my best choice. Probably the Ostrogoths, but we don't know. And we got a couple of new kingdoms here. The Lombards and Bavarians have both shown up as new kingdoms. I chose not to do it with the Avari. The main reason, so it's kind of weird. The Lombardi are in a good position to become a kingdom. The Bavarians not so much so, and shittier than that, I'm out of level 1 cities. So I gotta start using spare random counters for that shit too, which, I mean, theoretically, I don't, but I need something to remind me that that's not a level 1. So we're popping random counters into the game for other uses, and they're not. This one's a subjugation to one nation. Similar looking one, subjugation to a different nation. This one's subjugation to the Lombards. It's just such a fucking mess how little, how small the counter mix is. It obviously is not sufficient to play more than a couple of turns of this. And that's what I think. I think what happened was people played one of these short scenarios that you don't actually get in the game because they didn't. My best guess is they didn't contract to print it. They ran out of money because they ran out of money for shipping, and started begging for money for that. And that's just my guess. The claim, which, me not being, me being paranoid, I obviously look for worse solutions and for people lying and stuff. But the claim is that the Chinese didn't send it, that the printer sent everything but the scenario book. That's possible, except that, that's not how you make your name as a printer, right? If something doesn't end up sent, the word's going to get around about you, and you're not going to get more business in that country. And so you probably try to make it up and say, oh, sorry, we'll send this out. Yeah, we're going to take a loss on it, but, we want people to recognize that we at least meet our end of the bargain. Otherwise, there would be a lawsuit and all kind of mess. And it's not a way to run a business, right? Unless, of course, they went with something that's already collapsing. Where they can't afford to give decent service and there's no real reason to anymore. Anyway, so we had these two conversions. For the Bavarians, the reason they need it is they need to be able... well, see, this is weird, because they actually controlled Germania as a barbarian. So I believe they still control it when they switch over to being civilized. In which case, I actually don't have them down there for it. But they did control it by having their horde there. So they don't lose control of it by switching to civilized, as far as I can tell. So I'm going to write them down as owning that. It was actually that transition that was the main reason that I wanted to get them into being a kingdom. But the first thing that sparked me was they were out of units. Being out of units means I'm not going to generate, my free replacement, my free reinforcements or whatever from the time track anymore. So let's start banking money. Although the honest thing is, kingdoms kind of, smaller kingdoms don't make a lot of cash. And Germany isn't worth a whole hell of a lot, even though there's a lot of provinces in it. They're just a half each. So I'm probably not going to be raking in the money here with, two cities? So I got a city here. And of course this one's not needed. Yeah. I could actually take this sucker off the board. I have a lot of level 1 fortified cities printed on the map that I'm using, so I actually don't need those. I don't need counters for those. And I could start drifting some of those over and take from somewhere a little less. Not that one. That one actually isn't. I don't know. I'll leave it as it is and remember it. Cities don't grow that much, so yeah. So there is actually enough counter mix if you're willing to use the printed cities. I like using the fortified cities with pieces on the map because it helps them stand out so I can remember them. But there are a lot of those, so you could get away with less. Okay, what else do we got here? I guess it's time to start aging the kingdoms, and I wasted a lot of time babbling about who knows what. Conceivably, the Ostrogoths could gain more points by having forces and trying to gain some of the Italian territories that they've lost in the north that are valuable to them back, as opposed to the Burgundians, who actually are kind of sitting on their biggest value spaces. Burgundy might be able to get control of southern Gaul. Ostrogoths probably can't get control of Italy. Can't be sure either way. But the deciding factor was the Burgundians were already in double decline, and the Ostrogoths were only in single decline. So by pushing the Burgundians back 3 spaces, I don't lose 5 victory points for them. And that's probably within the margin of error between the two countries, whatever is happening. So that's what we're going with there. I mean, it's possible that the Ostrogoths could beat up the Lombards, but the Lombards have a lot of pieces available to them, and they have cash. The Franks are really the main opponent to the Burgundians, and while they have pieces available to them, tons of pieces available, they're not really running on a very good economy, and can probably pick off spaces and get control. The Visigoths holding areas of southern Gaul, though, is a bigger problem there. They missed their role by 1 for becoming an empire. I don't know how big a deal that is. Had they captured Constantinople, that would have made it more likely, which is kind of a cool thing. More level 1 cities converted into capitals. Again, I don't really want to stop using those markers on the board, although pretty soon I may feel the need to, because I may want those white counters for subjugations for some color or another. The Byzantines took their hit for being at the end of their age, which is just painful. And lots and lots of negative victory points thrown down already, although the majority of them on the red player. The first thing to look at is, hey, do we have Islam? Well, that's a random shot at the end of this turn, essentially. There are a number of modifiers to it, like Persian and Byzantine warfare, which will not happen and did not happen last turn. Heresy markers on the map and a heresy in Persia, none of which exist right now. We haven't seen heresies in a long time. Not sure why. And so it's basically a 50-50 chance of the game ending this turn. Wow, that might be kind of a bonus. Although, I kind of want to see what happens turn 12. Nothing too exciting. Some new leaders and stuff, but nothing too exciting. The thing is, the highly controversial idea that Islam was a product of the invasions rather than something which predated the invasions or that was adopted, was an already existing, actually, most likely was an already existing faith that was adopted by the Arab invaders, rather than the, historical Mecca, Medina, the tradition that Islam holds, is one that I kind of embrace. And to me, what it means is those invasions had little or nothing to do with the religion itself. And that kind of makes sense. It's very seldom the case where a faith or an ideology really sparks alone a movement. Movements tend to be for economic or other reasons. There are exceptions for certain, and so, I don't want to say, well, it's impossible, because that just doesn't happen. There are some exceptions, but it's a fairly rare thing. Normally, it's the existence of a power vacuum, which makes sense, and you're seeing the effects of that here. The difference being the Vandals are the clear inheritors here, and I'm fine with it being random, etc. It's just the points of it being so related to religion. I'm not sure I completely agree with that. I think the random die roll is just fine. I don't see any real reason to put certain factors that. So one of the problems with the early days of Islam is there is no writing that survives from it. And the earliest writing that there is appears to have been modified. And modified specifically in terms of where the faith started and whether or not the early military success was really linked to the faith. And that's where things get kind of funky. There's a lot that's pointing to early, to the invasions happening from the Arab Peninsula being very widely successful, and then adopting the religion, and and if you follow that, it's very clear that, like, if that happened, they had to have modified the holy texts of something that was probably growing up about the same time and merged the two into one thing. But again, it's pretty badly shrouded, just like the beginning of Christianity is. The Vikings apparently have a 50-50 chance of raiding this turn. And they may not, there may not be a 12th turn, so they may not even show up at all. Neat. See, last turn the Huns weren't on here, but now they're on. Now they have a leader again, but again, they have that one unit barbarian thing, which is impossible. They also chose to make the Scots a kingdom. The reason being, the game could end this turn. They want that 10 victory point bonus. You could say the same about the Avars. The problem is, jeez, and the Khazars can't until next turn. The Avars got a pile of units by being barbarians, so we're just kind of counting on the game going another turn, which may be a little stupid, but whatever. And I gotta replace some kings too. And otherwise, I think I'm about done for now. We took care of the Burgundian rebirth. You can see a pile of Burgundians up there. That'll put us to the events phase. A bit of a painful process regarding the reinforcements, which is, especially as the game gets, more and more, and there's just all these excess kingdoms all over the place, where I have to hunt down and make sure that kings come off the board who are dead, because there's, 2-turn kings. The 2-turn kings are listed on there, but the problem is it doesn't direct me that somebody's dying. So like the Visigoths had a king who was available last turn, is not available this turn, so I have to put a nameless king in play. But noticing that and finding all of those, especially, under a pile like this, shit, where somebody is facing the wrong way, is an issue. It's just part of the mechanical burden of playing this damn thing. I think there was something else. I was trying to arrange the order of the countries. I used to do that, but now I kind of just don't give a shit. So I think I'm done for a while. But I did the status of nations thing soon after my last turn. I did some more roof cleaning work today, but I'm up here doing the event phase, and I would have completely forgot if I was starting a new turn at this point in the day about that card, because I'm not looking at cards until now. But I just drew. I had a couple of combat events for these guys that they tucked away, but I just drew the scarcity card. And I want to bring this up because, again, this is just one of those, hey, something's fucked up here, and what do? You make up rules on the spot. What it says is selected civilized area or at random using the revolt table. Okay, the revolt table is, I guess, this thing. But here's what I've been doing. I've just been rolling, is it west or east map, and roll on that. That's the only table that there is present. But that's not the rules for using this. The rules for using this is you already have a particular empire in mind. It's generally the drawing power on a revolt card or in a revolt event. And in the event that you're talking about a particular empire, that's on one half of the map, then you roll on one of these two tables. Instead, what I do is I roll west versus east and just see. So that's going to be an eastern. And then I roll here. This is just for this. It's going to be in the Persis area. And now I roll for who gets to pick it. The designated chooser option there. And again, it's an interpretation that's valid and possible. So the Persian player gets to choose a Persian province. Oh, well, actually, it doesn't matter. There's no chooser here because it affects the whole area. And this is going to be a scarcity counter. Okay, I believe that's the Penuria, not the Famas. And I just put that over here, and that affects all of Persis, for what it's worth. But, I mean, again, I had to jump through a hoop and make an interpretation on the card. And it's just, I point it out because it just catches me as the first thing I hit today. But the game is replete with these, It really is. Didn't you know it? We got Another card that follows the same thing, and this one actually directs you, I don't think this one did, to the rules section, the 16C here. Again, it has designated area umpires only, because for revolts, it is based on a particular umpire, but here again, this is just some area on the map. So, you know, I follow the same thing. This is a plague, which is a little more interesting. It reduced a city. Has a 50-50 chance on every city that's reducible. It says every level 2 or higher city. Obviously, I can't reduce this, so I didn't even roll. And it also caused some loss of units, which is pretty cool. And it has an economic effect as well, so I'm going to keep it kicking out there until the economic phase. And while that ate up the events for yellow and blue, getting one of these, it's kind of weird because the red player can always tell, you know, no matter how you stack the deck, am I getting a hold event or not? It kind of makes sense to me, and I don't think this is the case. If hold of it, if you drew one of these truly random events, you would still get a hold event afterwards. There is certainly no such rule in the events section. Anyway, that took us through the events step. And now we go on with some simple stuff. You know, this stuff's not that important. The raids, they just generate a couple of victory points perhaps throughout the course of the game. And the caravan, a little bit of an income boost for one player, basically, who happens to be sitting on that caravan. And of course, this one, nobody seems to own it anymore because the Khazars moved out of it completely. A barbarian nation can't hold control of something. They have to manage to meet the control requirements each turn. So my horde would have had to stay behind to get that caravan money. Not that it's that big a deal. It's really kind of a funny thing. So, like, presumably there's supposed to be a volume 2 to follow this, which, you know, I mean, I'm kind of excited about, right? That would be probably a standalone game with a given setup, or an extension of this. It's the extension of this that obviously I'm interested in. Well, by doing a standalone game on it, that's fine. But by doing an extension, it means that there are certain elements that you'd be trying to get victory points for on the last turn of the game that may expend some of your capability for the next turn. And I don't know quite how to put this. I guess something should kind of reflect that, yes, but if you're playing, you know, just this game, you should get a certain penalty for being, you know, weakened to a certain extent at the end of the game. I'm not sure how big a deal that is. Generally, people who control a lot of territory, that's a good thing for the most part. But if you expended some of the times you can get a lot of victory points off of, you know, losing your units, like the Persians did. And now they paid a huge price for that. I don't see anyone on this board who's got that kind of condition. But it's possible the Persians would throw themselves at the Byzantines the last couple of turns of the game, even if they tried very hard to keep themselves as a viable kingdom for the whole length of the game. It's hard to be viable once you hit 12, but they might have made the goal to reach Empire or something, and really throw away, you know, their existence on some projected future turn. And there's no penalty for that. I don't know, you know, shrug your shoulders, whatever. And the Hibernia got themselves wiped out off the board with a failed raid, and the Vikings tried to raid the same location up here, since there's no longer a penalty there. And there's troops in any other locations that they're allowed to raid, I believe. They're only allowed to raid Britannia, which is actually not areas that they did raid, but we'll ignore that. But I noticed something interesting. They lost a unit. The Hibernians lost their second unit. Here's the Viking unit. And this is what both of them are. Heavy elite unit. Now, I don't know if that means that they're supposed to have elite units if they show up on the board. But that would be kind of a weird situation because remember, barbarians can't have elite units. But there may be a special case for them. There's no rule for it, of course. But it might just be one of those things that, again, you choose to interpret the counter to mean that. Some more fun to my complaints. So last time, I don't remember what was happening. I think I flipped through all of these books and found the end of game table. This time I decided to look in the rules for some reason. And you can still get there. It's hard because I don't remember where it was. But it says the game ends on turn 11 if Islam or turn 12. Otherwise, see timetable. So I have to go to the timetable. There it tells me to go look at the Persian player rate. And there I get to the same place. I think this was a little quicker, although I did have to flip through this whole rule book and to find where the setup, scoring, and winning section was. But the die roll for this gives a +1 if there's 5 or more heresy markers on the map. Now, we've seen a couple heresy markers show up, just a couple, throughout the course of the game. They age and basically last for 2 turns each. I can't see how there could possibly be 5 or more, unless there's a card that causes a widespread heresy. And maybe there is. I mean, there's a lot of event deck we didn't go through. Right? A lot of potential randomness here that's just not brought into play. But there you have that. Anyway, what am I doing? I'm doing the annoyance that's the diplomacy cards, which I really do see as an obnoxious addition to the game. Early on, they were barely useful. Now there's a couple of cards that are useful. Like before, when the Romans or Byzantines were in, getting extra troops by turning in mercenary, by using their mercenary cards was worthwhile. Now their best effect is they give me an extra buck at the end of the turn. Even more fun in the complaints department. The way that this is structured is sort of this pushover here as to the raids where it's not aligned with the rest of the things, and I missed the Arabs entirely this time. I had to go back and do them, and they actually scored 3 points for green. Completely random shit, right? I mean, Raiders are just kind of this, how many points are you going to get? Who the fuck knows? And it's just, it feels like such a pointless mechanism in the game. They barely, I mean, that elite Viking might, but they barely have an impact if they show up. And once they do show up, they're never going to get you. Like if they successfully land and colonize or whatever, they stop being of any value to anyone. They just become kind of a roadblock and a speed bump, basically. Drops actually gained a couple of cards they would kind of like. First of all, the treaty card. I could pay $5 to another nation and seize a province. And it creates a non-aggression pact. And that would be pretty damn useful. I could push the Lombards out of here. The problem is, if the Ostrogoths do that, they're going to go bankrupt. And that's going to cost a lot of victory points. I'm probably better off losing my Ostrogoths more significantly than that. So I don't want to play that, even though it seems like a good card. The other one's the marriage. I have enough money for a marriage, and I could try to marry the Lombards. That offers, first of all, I pay $2, and that's basically, I have 7, so I could afford $2. But that basically offers 2 victory points to my enemy, which in this case would be the Lombards, to not attack. In exchange, the playing nation receives 1 unit of the target nation's choice to place it anywhere in its own territory. I don't know the ordering of any of this, so like, if the Ostrogoths pay the marriage, the Lombards, I don't know if they can refuse it or not, but it looks like the Ostrogoths have to pay no matter what. And it doesn't look like it looks to me like the Lombards get to choose. So here's the problem. When does the unit go over? And, is there some kind of requirement? I get 2 victory points if I don't attack seems kind of weird. So the fact that I can't even fucking figure the card out keeps me from using it for the most part. I used it once between allied nations. That might be a worthwhile thing here, to say give it to the Visigoths and give them two victory points, or give it to, I don't know, the Bavarians probably don't need the points. But yeah, I think I'll do it with the Visigoths just to get the victory points. Sort of a positive effect to all this mechanical action with the diplomats. I only used the one. Made that marriage with the Visigoths. That's great. There's now a Visigoth over here. But the deposit and money changed hands, which is kind of cool because I have enough for him to buy his passive card still. But this guy could actually buy a military card now, if that's desirable. I don't know if it is. Has a decent leader, so maybe. Much better leader here, but can't do anything useful with that. No one else chose to use their cards, and there were actually less of them than before. But one thing is I have to check all the leaders for all the civilized nations, which means I found myself several nations that I hadn't put a Rex on the board. They had either lost it during the turn or had somebody age. But if somebody aged, I probably replaced them during the status phase or whenever I did do those checks. But the fact that I'm looking at each of the kings means that I'm spending a little bit extra effort and making sure that everybody's got their king on the board at this point. Not that that's terribly important. I would also notice it when I do the economics for these fuckers. And I think we're done for the night, getting to the administrative phase. But one painful thing I should mention, turn 11, the game could end here. That means both this and next turn, if they both happen, are essentially victory point turns. You don't score victory points on both of them, but you gotta figure out I'm gonna get everywhere I want to, which means it's gonna be a more painful turn in terms of placing all these stupid pieces during each player's turn to see what they want to get to and what they want to do and trying to punch on. And some countries might just take a risk and say, wow, I'm not really set up, but things might be better next turn. Let's just hope for the best. I don't know, but you definitely have to, make those fairly complicated territorial decisions twice in a row. For what? A random end of the game mechanism? Is that really that useful? I don't know. And what happens if the Arabs don't come? I'm really curious about that. Are they guaranteed to come on turn 12 if you're playing, say, volume 2 of this? I would assume so. The game isn't one where, shit just doesn't happen ever. Eventually it takes place, I think. Oh God, I'm terrified of the idea of what the rules would be like for switching from one to the other. Because I can only imagine, especially if it is a standalone game for the volume 2, the counter mixes, how you do the transition from counter mixes and how well that will be explained. I'm also a little afraid of the two bonuses, the pre-scenario bonus and the Into the East expansion in terms of the integration points. I do not look forward to trying to tackle those, although I intend to next time I play. But I can only imagine that given the amount of effective design work that's gone into this, that it will just be a fucking nightmare. Gripey mood, but not a not a very much I want to play mood, but I do want to gripe, so I'll just keep going with my riff on the variable end being one of two terms. So normally variable end in something like Lords of the Sierra Madre, as an example, and I'm looking for it. I think it's hidden behind those boxes over there. It's got to be. Got to be in here somewhere. But I ain't seeing it. Very odd. I wonder if I have it done with my non-war games for some reason. Anyway, with a game like that, it is semi-economic, but semi-not. Oh no, that won't be there. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of the wrong period. There it is, right before Mets. Okay. Normally with games that have sort of a variable ending, part of the idea is to prevent you from performing calculations that are assured at the end of the game. And it does serve that purpose here, I think. You know, hey, do I want to do this on this turn or that turn? It leads a little bit of uncertainty. But quite often what it is just to say you don't want to push too hard and break yourself. And it's usually a long series of turns that it's possible in. And the last turn of it, it's really unlikely that you reach that. Another game that has the variable ending that I just recently did was the Stellar Horizons, which you can kind of see in the darkness there. Where again, you know, it means you don't go all out for victory on any particular turn because you can't predict which turn it's going to be. Well, here, it's basically a 50-50 chance. And you have some ideas of the modifiers that are involved in it. So you have a little bit too much knowledge, you know, in terms of which turn is more likely. And it has this added burden of the amount of extra effort that the victory point turns generate in the Britannia series overall, but in this particular one, even more than most. You know, I'm having to throw pieces down all over the board to see where I want to get to with a lot of countries. Part of it being the kingdoms don't go away or anything, but also, okay, it doesn't matter for the ones that can't do anything, but also that there are just a lot of places that want a lot of different kind of disparate things, and it's not very clear where they want to be. It's not like, yeah, 1 point for every space in Britannia, 2 points for this one, you know, where it's like, okay, I can make that decision pretty easily. No, it's like 5 points for this one, 4 for these 3, 3 for these 2, 2 for one more, and then the rest are 1. And maybe not all of the rest in an area or something like that. It's just, it's kind of all over the fucking place. And so there's a lot of places that you want to specifically focus on in a way that most of the Britannia games don't. They just kind of say this, you want anything in Hispania or anything in Britannia, more or less. And if you get all of it, you get a bigger bonus or whatever. This one's a lot more fiddly with the points, which, you know, would seem to indicate some kind of, you know, really careful design work in play, but the rest of the game seems to indicate that there is absolutely no design work in play in terms of, like, you know, trying to tinker and make things work particularly well. And also there's enough variance in how well a country does, you know. I mean, look, the Avars kind of got fucked. They're subjugated. They're only going to get half their victory points. The Gepidae are quite powerful for some reason. What's up with that? We're near having a Gepidaean empire each turn. So, you know, it's like, well, that's okay, But you kind of wish that they didn't put that extra burden on the players in terms of how much effort you have to put in on each victory point turn. But then to have a variable victory point turn that adds so little in terms of the uncertainty, it really, if the game ends on turn, if the game does not end on turn 11, which is pretty much a 50-50 chance unless there's a lot of shit going on to affect that, then you do it twice, and on turn 12 you absolutely know anyway, right? And if the odds are high on turn 11, you kind of lose that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the game's going to end on this turn, you know. Yeah, well, you lose the opposite of that. You gain the knowledge that the game's probably going to end on a given turn, which means then you start making those game end decisions without reaching here. So I don't see too much too much advantage to adding the variable game end, and it sure the hell throws an extra burden on the players, in addition to having to play another fucking turn of this thing. We look at the last term, randomness, in another fashion, which is the fact that at least one of the players, the red player, is sort of destined to produce a lot of points early in the game, and presumably, although we're not seeing it so far, the counterbalancing impact is they get nothing later in the game. These are all point sinks now, except maybe the Franks, you know, who are still doing okay and holding up, not losing too many points. Although in actuality here it was the Byzantines who were holding up last turn, but whatever. You would presume, you know, you look here and you see, well, I got negative 44 points there. I got the least points in the victory point turn. Granted, before that, it wasn't really that big a penalty for me, but that point sink is definitely there for these last couple turns, I would think. And an extra turn at minus 40, 50 points, that's again this major, random, completely uncontrolled thing. Kind of say the same about the Huns. If they manage to reach empire status or whatever, they still have to make a lucky shot. But there's this very random factor that could significantly change the point outcome for a player. And again, I don't think play balance and any kind of competitive like management of your victory points essentially is really a factor in this game, knowing his other games, especially EU. But if it were, this just throws that all out the window in a sense. You know, if you're expecting a tight game on turn 11, it's not going to be for the red player on turn 12, and likewise the other way around. You know, if it's going to be tight on turn 12, well, there's at least a 50-50 chance they don't make it to turn 12, and boom, they just get boosted way up. I want to think about, I'm kind of trying to wrap up thoughts here as I go through the last couple turns. It's not going to all make it into my review, there's no question of that. I don't keep notes anymore. I used to for a while. Not in this, but I mean way back early on when I thought I'd be relevant in general, but I just don't have the energy for that. You can't just make nations kind of go away. You can't just make them go away due to external actions, okay? They can go away due to something like the imperial collapses. It would be fine for kingdoms to decrease in that way. But you can't have it be like, oh, look, I destroyed your kingdom, you know, by taking the capital or something like that. You can't replace subjugation with destruction, for example, because enemies won't do that to you, then, right? Or they'll only do it if the net balance is in their favor. It just enters this weird gamey type situation. The reason being, hey, you know, there's this huge point sink here for the red player. If you wipe that out, you're taking away a -20 per turn penalty on that player. You just can't do it. So there's not an easy fix that I see there. There is a potential fix with saying collapse, could happen within the kingdoms if they're weak enough or something like that. But again, even a strong kingdom, even something like the Franks, can lose points just because it's not generating a lot of points, and each turn it's going to be taking that aging. That's 5 points there. It's going to be taking potential events and stuff that just keep pushing it more and more age. Each time it ages, it's 5 points. Each decline is another 5 points because those convert into ages. Just ouch, And bankruptcies, of course, are the worst of all. But they don't get rid of you like they do with the empires. So if you can't reach empire, you are going to just be this anchor around the player's neck. My favorite fucking event comes up for the Franks. They're at -20 points for the turn, but they get the catastrophic fire event, which, again, they're going to be 10 minutes to resolve this thing and probably have almost no effect. 35, I think, is my count now, because more and more kingdoms are showing up at a higher pace than cities are burning down. And it hit one that would be invulnerable, so the options were either a fire or nothing. And I mean, just there's like no sense of how much effort you have to expend for what effect. I understand oh yeah, it would make sense if there are fires periodically, and sometimes they destroy, they damage the city, and sometimes they just hit the income temporarily. It all makes sense and everything, but this is where, like, you do have to take into account this is a physical game that you're playing, and that you have to, you have to design it for the players to actually play it. And I definitely understand with this, and it's, with its roots being, say, a computer game, which is what I understand it to be, that Thibault designed it as a computer game first. In a sense, that's how he's always kind of designed games. I mean, EU is kind of an unplayable mess as a board game. It's not this bad, but, it's got significant problems, and it requires a serious amount of effort to keep track of all the diplomatic relationships and everything like that are handled in it, and a computer ended up doing it so much better in the computerized version. For La Grande Guerre, the difference was really, not that I've played World War I Gold to any extent, but I did kind of look at it a little bit. The main difference was there were things he couldn't fit in the box anymore. The rules were getting too complicated, etc. And he was probably told, look, cut the agricultural values, they don't matter. So there was significant amounts of information on the map, and presumably in a lot of other places, that was just left out of the game, as in, you just can't deliver this. The components are limited enough. And, with this one, on the other hand, it seems like the game has actually got too many things that so EU, the diplomatic track, makes a concession of this is how you'd want to do it to make it playable as a board game. This one, I don't feel like those concessions were made. However, there's also not the sense, right? There's not the intuitive understandability of what things mean. What does it mean that there's this city here forevermore? Presumably it'll last into the next era, whatever, forever, however long the game handles things, unless there's some kind of special rule for cleaning up some of the mess between games. that will always be generating negative points for the red player or something along those lines. I have no idea. I, unless like section 2 is basically, well, you use this to define certain nations and that's it. You know, other things just clean up and disappear or something, you know, because they're not worked into the formula. I don't know. But when I look at what I just did, and then the amount of complaining I did from it too, but I mean, it's just fucking ridiculous to expect someone to first of all find all these locations, and I probably missed some, I don't know, and then, you know, figure out a pathway that they can do a random roll with them, all for what is very likely, given the number of capitals in the game, unable to have an effect 50% of the time or close to that. Or what did it do? It took $2 away from the Jutes' money. That could be enough to bankrupt them, to cause them serious problems. It could have a significant effect on that country, conceivably. But this could be abstracted in such a much easier way, like a card that says, you know, your kingdom is affected by a fire. So it's not the whole goddamn map, you know? It happens at a disruptive time. I just handled some aspects of the Franks, but now I have to count their stuff. Now, I pulled all the counters off the map, and you might say, well, gee, wouldn't it make sense to just fucking leave them there? Because, you know, that is a significant part of the work, is finding them all, counting them. If I just have them all out, would it hurt? Yeah, I thought about it, and I'm hoping it doesn't come up again, but there are a lot of countries, and it could. But the reason I took them off is it's really hard to manipulate the board and find the things you need to find with all those stupid wooden pieces on the board. And you need the wooden pieces in order to see what's going on. Again, I could have them all numbered, you know, have a big set of numbered counters out there or whatever. But that's not given to you in the game, you know. And I don't know if I want to deface my little wooden pieces that much yet for this. I mean, I do use them in a lot of games as markers of various types. And for little countries that, you know, it feels like, hey, maybe there would be a kingdom that would last here. It wouldn't just evolve into sort of the chaos of nothingness of these little tiny kingdoms that can't afford anything, as opposed to the non-player kingdoms, which of course aren't affected by any of this aging shit or anything, right? And just last forevermore without any decrease. The Ostrogoths had a fair-sized force. They would have been potentially a threat to the Lombards. They have a good king. Well, the good king got neutralized, and my money was such that I can't hold any of my stuff. And I'm bankrupt and producing negative 20 victory points per turn, no chance of recovery, and not a lot left. If it weren't for Sicily being a port, I wouldn't have any money whatsoever. I would have had no units at all, and I'd just be holding Sicily from now on as one of these sort of pathetic little cities that are just meant to be conquered and subjugated, but can never actually be absorbed for full ownership of a province for its money. You can never create the empires the way the Roman Empire was, because you have all these weird little disassociated cities in them. The Burgundian Renaissance, including all those extra units, didn't save them worth shit. They bought a passive card, but it ended up throwing them, yeah, all those extra units actually threw them into bankruptcy. And they just ended up completely screwed. With they're back up here and they're losing 10 points. No, they would have been in worse shape otherwise, but I definitely should have spent those points on the Ostrogoths instead. The Burgundian, trying to save somebody who's already at the end of the chart apparently is foolhardy. it seemed like the better idea. I thought I could kind of keep both kingdoms in sort of shape where they might break out and do something. Nah. They still is a fairly powerful kingdom, you know, right on the verge of empire, honestly. They've been checking each turn, even now after the Khazar have moved in, after the Avars have moved in. They're still in pretty strong, you know, with pressure from the Bavarians. They're still in pretty strong position. The Lombards, I think, have an interest in Illyria, but they're more interested in Italy. So, you know, they can't really afford to make that choice unless they had won in Italy. And here's the difference. There's no one else until the Avars came who is really concentrated on that Danubian region. Now, if the Huns had been around, then things would be really hard on the Gepidae. But I actually have the feeling that the Gepidae are likely to become some kind of powerhouse in that area. And I don't think, like, I don't remember any great Gepidae kingdom as opposed to like the Franks or the Burgundians, who actually maintained some strength and existence throughout a period. The Suebi, and they went into Hispania, and you know, that's the traffic jam problem, and that actually impacted the Franks and Burgundians there, is that not everybody who's supposed to be fighting over Hispania made it, so the Visigoths actually managed to get pretty damn potent in a way that they probably, just like in Hispania, can't actually get if the game works more or less as assumed. If it weren't for that traffic jam, which may have been my fault in terms of not making that extra turn for the Germanics. But yeah, I don't remember any great Gepidae existence being spoken of. I mean, I remember the name, I remember them existing, but to me they're kind of there with the Avars and the Atlans and these others who had some kind of strength, you know, but I don't remember them settling down and becoming some kind of massive influence, and certainly not an empire. Again, maybe the Hunnish Empire is supposed to succeed. I don't know. Anyway, their time is limited, right? They're about, they got a card which aged them a couple of turns that they had to pay a lot of money for, but they have a lot of money actually. And you can see they're walking into the next turn with 14 bucks again after building every single one of their units. And granted, they had lost a bunch of infantry, but they've got another shot to like take Greece or something like that. Although their chances of successfully sieging Constantinople are pretty low. I think I'm pooped out. I figure I've gotten through about half the kingdoms. Not all the important ones, though. The Visigoths and Vandals are still kicking around. The Epithae, the Lombards. Those are all fairly significant in terms of they can do real things. And the Bavarians, you would say, well, they're in pretty good shape, yeah, but they have no more pieces, you know. So it's sort of a combination. The Bavarians are never going to become potent, and that's fine because they have kind of an unfair advantage. Nobody wants the area that they're in. But the Gepidae has the same situation. They have a fair amount of pieces. They're not humongous. They're not Vandal-sized, I don't think. But, you know, depending on who you are, what kind of transpires, etc., you could become quite a potent force in a given area. I think there's just too much skewed in here to give any kind of real view of this movement of peoples. The movement of the barbarians worked okay, but this development of these Dark Age kingdoms and everything, it is not feeling right. I've been away from the game for a little while. Not only I was doing roof and gutter stuff first couple days of the week, and then went for a nice long walk with my wife yesterday. Today, though, even yesterday, my back was hurting from the roof stuff, and I didn't want to go back up there. And I just feel like I've been kind of pissing away my day, not just here, but at work too, where I just haven't been very motivated to do shit. Whatever. It is a cold snap. It's feeling like winter, you know. It's like that the season changes make me just want to curl up in a ball and try to be warm. And I am just emotionally unable to, like, you know, turn the heat up or anything like that. I have it in my room, and it's not that cold. I mean, I could be doing stuff, but somehow just emotionally, and the day is getting darker quicker and everything. It'll help when daylight savings comes or goes away, because then I end up on a different schedule where I'm getting up and it's darker, which is still going to have effects, but I ignore it, and the rest of the world is kind of on it. So, like, whatever. I got in the habit of ignoring it in Phoenix. The Vandals. So they were impacted by the plague, and I got to keep this out because if anybody goes into the plague areas, it has a chance of killing their units. What plague area? It's in Africa. They actually generated quite a bit of revenue, and they don't have a lot of units to build. I had an interesting choice in my cards, which is kind of neat. So I had this as my draw, and I'm like, well, I definitely don't want to do passive, although that gives me the most option. And neither one of those would have been good. They would have left me without my leader. Yeah, you know, an extra campaign, an extra unit, etc. That gives me some shit that I want, and I'm going to steal that cab, actually, now that I have stacking capability for it. So that would have hurt. I didn't look at them, obviously, but the reform, you know, if this was earlier in the game, reform would matter, but I'm not that worried about gaining age. So I passed on that. It wasn't a bad card, but it would have caused another revolt, and I got enough revolt problem that I'm not able to resolve. Could have made it worse. So I picked the military card, the most likely to give me my leader, and it worked out pretty well. The increased costs, not that big a deal, because I'm pretty rich and I only had a couple of units to build. I've got both my boats out. I'm getting to the point where if I don't start losing units, and I don't think that's going to happen. The Visigoths aren't interested in me. I'm not interested in them. We're not going to fight. The Byzantines are, you know, kind of on the ropes right now. So I'm expecting to gain some ground on them. And also, when you're only fighting against like one stack against one stack or something, you don't suffer a lot of casualties. It's usually like maybe one unit per fight. So that may not be that big a deal. But we managed to get our money all the way up to the top. I may start walling cities or something. Something we haven't seen since the Roman era. Or, geez, God forbid, I got enough money I could actually have bought units, but I have no barbarians near me, I don't think. Which, those are both mercenary. So, that's what we did there, and, you know, trying to get back in the saddle with the game, being away from it for a day and barely in it for the days before. I don't even know if I played Tuesday. Can put a pretty big fog in terms of what I'm doing. Our countries, the Visigoths not doing terribly well. A decline marker. Hispania is not very wealthy. It's only one province. And they have a lot of units. So they're able to hit that 5, so they may not hit a bankruptcy next turn. The Alani still in the same kind of position. They were able to pull things off so that they actually have a fair amount of cash kicking around. They didn't want to buy more units. They got card choices and basically made the trade of age. Their 2 card choices actually both aged them, but one aged them 2 spaces. And then the Gepidae, who are in pretty good shape, actually pocketed quite a bit of cash. They are out of units. It's not money like the Vandals have, so I'm not going to be able to build walls or anything. But, you know, I'm in a healthy state. But again, I actually should have drawn another card. I only had military cards come up, but that's what I wanted to do anyway, so it probably didn't hurt much. If I had, I would have had this one and this one. And I would have gone with the one I did anyway. Okay. Now, get the Efete left, Lombardy. Okay, the rest of the kingdoms, those that get victory points for becoming Christian have done so because this might be the last turn of the game. You know, for the most part, it doesn't make much difference. It's possible that somebody like the Alemanni could end up gaining, could end up in a position where they'd get an extra victory point if they waited a turn. It's just not worth that, so I just scored them all. I went and looked up the Gepidae, and yeah, they basically settled in Romania and kind of more or less disappeared. I feel like the Huns had more of a permanent status, at least giving the name to the rest of the world of Hungary, or lots of the rest of the world, but whatever. And to the Germans as a whole, even though they didn't really settle that far west, particularly. Trying to think if there was anything too exciting, and nothing really comes to mind. The Lombards doing pretty well. No big shock there. The Bavarians able to, they're on their plus 20 side there. The Scots doing fine. Nobody can... the thing with the Bavarians and Scots, I mentioned this before, nobody really gives a shit about them, so they can basically get all their stuff, which is, again, a little antithetical to what is usually the case in a Britannia-style game. At the very least, you're usually sitting on land somebody else is willing to take if they can get nothing else. But there's so little reason to take shitty land in this game. It's not particularly all that much more defensible. The mountains, yeah, you get the ambush roll, but the rest of it, not really. I actually think that the defensibility of some of the Britannia land is probably a little too high. In some cases, though, it does make sense. In some of the very worst lands, in terms of mountainous terrain and stuff, it was hard, and you saw things like the Basques exist there that could live on for a long time, or the Brigantes in Britain or whatever, where it does, and in the Highlands where things were significantly different. So all we got left is the Byzantines. Ouch. The Byzantines take an economic collapse, a bankruptcy, but they survive it with a die roll of like 1. They were at like +2 or +3, so there was some chance they could just collapse and disappear. Again, what does that do to any follow-up game? The Byzantines should be a major, major factor in whatever comes forward. And obviously you could have wow, they collapsed. That's kind of a rough deal. Here's a bunch of victory points to even things out. Or it could be, well, if one of the empires survives, that's fair, But I mean, it's like, if you're playing through, if there was the expansion to this, one has to be very careful with what the victory point situation is. You don't want to make it so that getting your empires dissolved. So like if there's a handicap for that, you don't want that to be so good that it becomes a worthwhile strategy by any means. But on the other hand, like the Visigoths are just such a penalty in Hispania, like the Huns being an empire or not, could be, this pivotal point for the green player. There's kind of this feeling of, well, there's these huge random events that could change the victory points completely. Now, for this game alone, the Byzantines disappearing at this point isn't going to mean much. They don't have any more victory points they're able to get. And they're not costing victory points either. The only thing that would cost victory points is their subsequent kingdom that's going to show up, their remnant, just like the Gallic remnant does here. There's a Byzantine remnant somewhere that causes you problems for the rest of the game. But that collapse was not a good thing. While it didn't cost victory points, it means I have less to defend myself and brings me closer to it. Also, collapsing at this point, the remnant isn't going to cost me much. It's It starts at an older age, I think, if it's like this one, but it's not right away a victory point penalty. So, it would reduce the capability of the Byzantines to really defend their territory well. I guess that's the net effect. No, actually they do have, wait a minute, they do have victory points at the end of the game. I was wrong. They're not going to make them, other than possibly, well, they've got Mesopotamia right now, except for this, but they're not going to be able to take that. They might be able to take the Orient back, and they put their elite unit there. So yeah, I was looking at the Western Roman card, which can't produce victory points this late in the game. The Byzantines still do. That's cool. But again, it's not going to be that huge a penalty if they're destroyed. They probably are not going to get their points. Their only real chance is, the Vandals destroy themselves and the Byzantines are able to get a lucky shot and retake the last space in the Orient. Because, yeah, they're not going to be able to take all of Mesopotamia again. All right. That is the end of the line for this. We're on to the military side of things, and I think I'm off to bed. Here I am feeling a little stunned and stumbling about. And maybe hung over my window leaks or melts. Gotta be careful. I've got my box underneath this. I have to get my sponge back over there. I shouldn't have that water there anyway. But so it's a little hard to face the game. The first turn, the first person I handled was the Afari, and that was very easy. I looked and I said, "Oh look, they're completely surrounded by Gepidai territory, and they're submitted. They're not doing anything. Awesome." But the next one was the Khazars, and as you can see, I got the complex set of spaces laid out, and I'm going to make some choices there. Red are the most valuable, then yellow, then blue. But I'm kind of regretting not becoming a kingdom for a couple of reasons. First, well, actually I couldn't, so I can't regret it. But yeah, they want to become a kingdom because they get 10 victory points if they can. But I'm regretting not being civilized, because a civilized nation could control things that a barbarian, has to actually have a presence in to have some control. So, for example, in Scythia here, I'm going to have to waste 2 units to hold these 2 spaces, or my horde, which might be worth doing, except I don't have an invasion, so I won't get, my workaround of that would mean I wouldn't get my extra campaign, so that kind of is right out. But I've got some hard calls here. So for example, I've got to take this or this. Those are not trivial. I've got to take this, which is Gepidai right now, and fight the Gepids over in Sarmatia, which maybe they don't care about, but if they want to become an empire, they do. Anyway, it's all just kind of this blur. Oh well. The point I'm trying to express in my not so cogent fashion, and this is how I am after dancing, which is why I don't tend to play much on Saturday, is that the mental work involved in this is significantly more than, say, in Britannia. And it's not just a matter of, oh, these are the areas I have to get to, great, that's fine. It's also the area control rules and how they apply to it, and the fact that, that doesn't look like it's going to be a significant factor here, but it might be in Sarmatia. It might end up, in fact, I have my horde in Sarmatia, so it almost certainly will end up in play. So that, and it's just this other layer of, do I own this or not? In Britannia, that's easy to see. It's hard to figure out, which areas can I actually get that I care about. This doesn't look like too horrible a problem, but it's about equivalent to the moderately hard decisions for which areas to sit in, especially since it's early in the turn, and you get scored after everyone goes. But it's about equivalent to the moderately difficult ones in Britannia. And maybe not the Danes, but that could be focusable. The problem, of course, is some of these areas are going to require fighting for. And then you have this follow-up turn, as though it's an invasion turn in Britannia. And you have, this question, do you have enough force and everything? And then add this other layer of the area control problem, which just complicates everything and makes it much, much more dense. And there's only a 50-50 chance that I'll actually be scoring this turn. So I'll have to do it again next turn, right? The thing is, during the movement, I think the Gepide actually lost control of the territory. I have them marked down as owning it. I don't know how big is Sarmatia. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They had 4. I think they still have 4. Yeah, they still own it. So I'm not even sure if I'm going to be able to take control away from them in the battles. And I've had to denude things. Of course, I have a follow-up campaign, but to try to get control of Sarmatia, it's something that can easily be taken away from me by the Gepide. The question being how much they want to. They kind of fucked up. The Khazar only get points for eliminating units in the Caucasus. Okay, fine. They've got victory points there. And Persis, where they barely have any victory points, I think, no. They have no interest in Persia. So that's kind of weird. their victory points are all in Sarmatia and Scythia and the Caucasus. They don't have any victory points over in Persia. So I don't know what the fuck that's about. Now we reassess who owns what. And obviously the Gepide own these 2 spaces. Great. They've lost these 2. That's fine. But they've gained this one because they had control of the area. But that's 3 out of 6. That's not 50%. So they no longer have control. And now the Khazar have control. So I don't have to worry about these 2 spaces. Except, of course, that if the Gepide want to take over Sarmatia, they can steal it back from me. But as long as my horde is here, I still have it. And now I have a shitty siege chance, which is not going to be good. Oh god, it's not going to be good. Because the Gepide are not in decline. So that's a -1, -2, so I need a 9. Great. Fact is, I failed to get my sieges. I have all my forces down here. I have all the victory locations that didn't require a siege with the exception of this one, which is a lower value one. I have 5 or more spaces, so I've got, close to my maximum victory points if the Gepide don't move around in here. And they're going to need to put 2 more units in there, and they may not be willing to afford that, especially since it's really not worth much to them for victory points this turn. All it does is give them that move to Empire. And boy, I'm fatigued just playing one player. One of these countries. Yeah, I mean, not the Afar. They were easy. But just doing one of these wiped me out, man. figured I'd start doing some of the simple kingdoms because I was like, the Gallic Romans don't have anything they can do, flip them over. Persia, pretty close, but I decided to attack here, and those Escalate wiped out their whatever the hell, Iberian allies there. Iberia still exists though, so I guess it'll keep spawning troops. I'm not sure. All of its units have been wiped out, but yeah, I would say they're gone now. What the hell? Get a complexity off the board, because they don't have a capital. So how can they respawn? Well, I don't know. I know last time when I played like 2 or 3 turns, I had the Armenians and Iberians just keep showing up at their capital. But I'm not sure they should. They don't have a marker to indicate that it's like in existence. So the fact that their troops got chased off, I think now that's just an independent capital. So screw it. In addition to the pain of hunting down specific locations, some of which are in kind of weird places, the Frankish goals appear to be stretch goals. Now, I guess that's okay. These are areas that the Franks didn't make it to, as far as my knowledge goes, until basically the era of Charlemagne. But that's not saying that they wouldn't have wanted to intervene. It's kind of a weird set. So like some of them, they got their capital, and this location has higher valued areas, and of course Paris. But then after they get those 3, they're interested in Italy and in Spain, in northern Italy, both of which became goals later on. But I'm not really sure how much pre-Charles Martel you saw the Franks wanting to expand in that kind of direction. One of the reasons being there was, an infidel in place, an opposing religion in Spain, and there was a particular power vacuum caused by the defeat of the Muslims coming up north, and then similarly there was a power vacuum in northern Italy. It's these things that drive the expansions that should be shown in the game. And this is a similar thing to the barbarian expansions, where there's no reason why the Visigoths particularly should want to be in Hispania, or the Vandals in North Africa. It's more that there's continuous pressure and they ended up there. It shouldn't be necessarily driven by the victory points. And here, they're being driven towards areas where maybe there is a vacuum, but it's the vacuum that should be driving their desire to be in places, rather than some kind of point set to, in 500 years, you'll want to be here. It's just whacked. The thing with the Frankish victory points is they are interested in certain specific areas, and I think I might make a shot at North Italy. In particular, because there's weaker things like the Alans, who are sitting on a very high valued location. There's maybe more points in Spain, I'm not sure, I would have to look it up. But I have to do a balancing between an attack on Spain, its likelihood, an attack on Italy, its likelihood, and other provinces that I could get. Because they also get a third of the point, essentially, by my reading. They call it 1 point for each, 1 point for each set of 3 other provinces. I think they mean a third of a point for each province, essentially. But although rounding makes a difference there. But yeah, I mean, it's like, well, what am I driven towards? What is this worth? Well, the red one's worth 7 points. That would mean a whole lot of provinces. So if I can take Cisalpine Gaul, there's definitely a strong advantage for that. In the interim, though, if I could submit the Burgundians, who are not yet submitted, that should get me southern Gaul. So, you got all this balancing work to do, figuring out what you're going to want to do and where you can get the most points, because getting a submission and getting an entire area, it's probably worth a few points. And then I could continue on with my campaign to attack and try to get into Italy. But that's not going to be easy because I only have one campaign. Of course, if I have a submission, I could slip through the Alps and across the hill and attack a relatively weakly defended Cisalpine Gaul and submit the Alans as well. And the Burgundians have just turned out to be this impossible nut to crack. I hit them, I failed to hit with any, it was 5 dice, 2 black, a die for archery. I failed to get any hits. I played a long battle card, which allows me to throw another round of battle. Another archery miss, another 5 dice, 2 blacks, failure. And then I took a re-roll in the hopes of getting 2 hits on the Burgundians. I've just been defeated by them completely, which is pretty damn impressive if you ask me. Put us in an ugly position where we had nowhere to retreat to except back where we were, so all we could do was subjugate the Burgundians. We succeeded on the second try, but we actually haven't gained anything. We didn't gain Southern Gaul. We gained a couple of provinces we otherwise wouldn't have been getting scores on, but we don't have Southern Gaul. We only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 12, I think. I'm wondering what that means. Oh no, 6 out of 12. Look at the German. Yeah. I would have needed. See, if I had captured this, what would that mean? Not much. I would have needed the Alains, I think, because see, my capture would have given up a province at the same time. Again, you really have to kind of wrap your head around the control rules. And as I get more used to them, they're becoming less painful. But man, it is a totally different way of looking at things that is incredibly painful mechanically. The first, let's say game, because I did play several, 3 turns or whatever before I played again. So it's taken me almost a whole game to get a real comfort with it. And it's still more painful than any other kind of counting type thing, because you not only have to count everything you actually hold anyway, but you have to record, what you're losing control of and everything. I prefer systems like Imperium Romanum's where you write down what you control and you don't lose it by leaving it, where you don't have to leave a military garrison everywhere necessarily. With this, I feel like those garrisons are sometimes hard to believe, So, for example, this city here, or this location here, has been under my control for a long time. This city has been under my control for a long, long time. But if I didn't control all of Northern Gaul, I would not control that space because I don't have units there. So, and I only control Northern Gaul because I controlled it before. It's like, it's just this weird sort of situation, where it's not how long you control something, but it's how long you control a whole area. That creates this sort of, they accept you. Let me rephrase that because I'm wrong. It's not how long you control something. It's that you control a whole area. Because you can instantaneously take control of an area and then you can evacuate it immediately. Whereas something like this space, which has been Frankish, since I don't know, way back here or something, hundreds of years, if I lost a couple of places here, it would collapse. And I'm not saying that's not possible. What I'm saying, though, is that it doesn't seem like the norm. I actually had another option, which I may have wanted to play, but I fucked up. For $5, I could have given myself another campaign. I have $5 for the Franks. I think I'm going to do it and hope the game ends early. Reasons for that being that there's a good chance the Franks were going to go bankrupt anyway with only $5 left. Basically, they would have to be getting a passive card, one which does not take away money and has no events that bankrupt them. And then they don't get bankrupted later in the turn by their large army, which there is a lot of ifs there. A weird thing, maybe an interpretation thing, because the Franks don't actually own Southern Gaul, but they do own it on the victory point phase, I get. So they don't actually own control of Southern Gaul. But I am going to count it as if they own it, because now they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 areas during the victory point phase only in it. So they get like a temporary control just for the victory point phase, because they can score an area for victory points. So that's kind of a fucked up thing. And honestly, I think that control should devolve based on subjugated nations, to tell you the truth. I just think overall control should devolve, which is to say you should get, but they'd have to write in something else there. So the particular that they'd have to write in is, let's say Franks were a subjugated nation of the Burgundians. The Franks control Gallia, the northern Gaul. I can't remember the terms for these. And that control would actually pass to their suzerain, which means that the Franks wouldn't control it. It's their suzerain who would get the money for it. It's their suzerain who, of course, gets the victory points for it. But what does that mean? You know, whatever, right? Because you have layers of control then, and that causes a different tangle that's just as problematic. It's not usually the case. Usually the country that is subjugated is pretty tiny, you know, but there are possibilities of a fairly large country becoming there's not much chance of a large country becoming subjugated. There's a fair chance of a small country that became subjugated growing and taking stuff over. It's unlikely, but it could happen. And that would be a special case that would cause some problems. Through a bunch of kingdoms who basically haven't done anything. Usually they couldn't do anything. Some, like the Burgundians, could have gone into Liger, tried to take that. I can't see any value to that because I'd be giving this up. It would help the Franks possibly, wouldn't it? No, it couldn't possibly. And this is where things are kind of problematic. If I'm able to score this for victory points, yet somebody's able to take it, wow, that's kind of weird too, right? So no matter how you interpret this, except maybe you don't get control of an area for subjugated nations counts. And I don't think it specifies that you do. That's definitely an interpretation. If it doesn't, yeah. Let's be very definitively ambiguous. So that gets me to the Gepidae, and you know, jeez. Oh, I just don't feel up to it. The Gepidæ were sitting at, on all the territories that they wanted to get for victory points. However, I went and re-grabbed Sarmatia, so I have a chance to become an empire again. And I marched into Greece and took kind of a weird thing. I grabbed Macedonia right off, but then I split up in my campaign, moving first here and then around, so that I could. Shit, there were Byzantine units alive. Crap. Yeah, we kind of screwed up. Okay. Well, I did something illegal, but I'm just going to let it stand. I failed in both sieges. Had I been able to get one of the two sieges, and I would have just gone for Athens if those troops were in Constantinople, then I could have gotten control of Greece, and that would give me a bigger chance towards becoming an empire. On the other hand, if I got Constantinople, that would have gotten me an even bigger chance. That gives another couple bonuses. And it doesn't matter too much. There's no real bonus to becoming an empire. So, the hell with it. But there should be. But I mean, the big bonus to becoming an empire is that you don't start going into decline. But I'm not in there yet. I will be gathering that up very shortly, however. What did we do? We did the Suebi. They couldn't do much. They attacked the Angles and ended up just giving that territory to the Franks because they killed the Angles that were there. The Angles are going to have to move their boat now. They no longer have a port there, for whatever that matters. And then we went on to the Vandals. Now, the Vandals tried two things. One, they have victory points they could get in Italy. Well, naval invasions are such an iffy thing that, especially if you don't have something along the coastline on an adjacent, on the same sea zone. So like here, to be on the same coastline, if I was on Greece, I would be on that same coastline, hitting that sea zone, but from Africa, I'm not. And I had to shift stuff all the way from Egypt. The landing happened, but the siege failed. And even if it had succeeded, I'd have to retreat. But the advantage is I'd have subjugated the Ostrogoths, which means I could have retreated up here, and I don't know. But as it was, my units are destroyed because they can't retreat. It wasn't a big deal. I didn't send much. The Ostrogoths kind of can't afford to give up territory, so, especially on a iffy interception chance. But the other thing is we conquered two areas in Oriens, and that gives me the majority of the cities there, 3-2. So I have now taken control of the Oriens region. And the important thing for that is I might become an empire next turn. Again, probably doesn't mean much, but I kind of like it as sort of a, ooh, that's cool, finally managed it with someone. All right. And I don't think in any way that it's likely that anyone should be an empire in this game, other than the original Roman empires. I mean, the biggest single invader or barbarian force that did settle is probably the Franks, and they really were in two regions, or two areas, so they wouldn't have been considered one, which is kind of weird because they probably can't survive. I mean, they're barely making it in this game. They're double decline with this. I mean, yes, they'd survive, but they'd start going bankrupt and start losing their units and all kind of problems like that. They were doing probably historically a little better than I am here. It's hard to tell because I don't know what it means that there's this huge force of subjugated Suebi here who could conceivably have taken Liger as well. Let me roll a siege for that because the Franks did not take their area. That would also be good for the Franks, but whatever. Yeah, I think they would have gotten it. So I'm going to give them 1 unit down there. That actually helps the Franks. Okay. I guess. I mean, again, the control and the interactions of subjugation and stuff like that are really kind of a spaghetti mass that you have to untangle. Bit of a problem. I have this marriage card on the Visigoths. I think somebody played a marriage on them. I'm guessing it was the Ostrogoths who did so. And thus I'm just going to be able to get the victory points, but I don't remember. I don't think the Visigoths particularly want to attack anyone. But I don't know. I mean, maybe the Alani or someone played it, although I can't think of anyone who doesn't really want the Visigoths to attack them. Maybe it was the Franks. Who knows? Who the fuck knows? My feeling is it probably was somebody blue who played it to give the Visigoths the victory points. Something incredibly exciting happened for the Alani and incredibly disappointing for the Visigoths. The Alani managed to get into here without an interception, and they actually defeated the Visigoths. Didn't cause any casualties. I mean, they did. They got a victory point for killing 1 unit. But the big thing is they're actually in Hispania, which cuts the Visigoth victory points significantly, and maybe gives the Alani some victory points. They are getting nothing for what they have right now. Of course, they're only going to get half their victory points, but whatever. Jutes managed to get one of their victory conditions, in addition to others, which is 6 or more provinces in Britannia. Now, it may not hold, but it looks fairly solid. They drove the Scots out of here, and that actually helps the Britons too, who have them subjugated, because I believe they now have control of Britannia for victory point purposes. Fucked up, to tell you the truth. I attacked the Scots, my own country, but it was the only way I could get through there. So, however, I don't know that the Scots would have been here. Unlike in Britannia, you don't have an option to kind of favor your own nations in battles or whatnot. So like in Britannia, in every other game in that is in the actual, lineage, this is sort of an offshoot. Hispania is still, I would say, in that lineage. The defender has basically you fight infinite number of rounds of combat until one side or the other is destroyed, and the defender has the option to retreat each round, which is significantly different from here. So you can kind of machinate to get control of an area by moving 1 unit in to attack 1 enemy unit, one of your same color units that you want to get out of there, and that way you've always got it defended, but there's a good chance that both units will survive the round and one of them can retreat. There's some risk to it. You might end up wiping out both guys, but and in this case I killed a bunch of Scots, but honestly in this one, once you make the decision to attack, it's kind of just fixed. You have no further decisions. You're just going to be rolling the dice to see, did I kill them all? Did I kill some of them? Whatever. And also, unfortunately, the Jutes don't really care about the victory points. But I had no way to reach the Angles, who I really do oppose. It's conceivable that the Scots could attack the Angles. I don't think they care to. Maybe they get some victory points. Yeah, they get victory points for it. But they actually just don't give a shit at all. All they care about is the Caledonian stuff. So, honestly, what I'm sitting on is just being obnoxious rather than anything else. I have my maximum victory points and no one else cares about them, so I can pretty much just skip their turn. Tholomei or whatever, Tholate, I don't know what the hell they're called. Sitting on all the territories they wanted. However, they're towards the end of the turn. Yeah, the Byzantines still had to go, but they thought they'd wipe out the Byzantines and take Mesopotamia from them and really kind of put them on the edge in terms of points. Now, I got my ass handed to me. I completely had the Byzantines outnumbered in a couple of battles, and the second of which I lost I lost a couple of pieces. Basically, I lost 3 pieces over the turn, some of which were kind of valuable. But I did manage to take Mesopotamia away from them. They are only sitting on these 2 cities, with the Ptolemy sitting on these, and the Persians here. I also tried to take Persia and subjugate it to me instead of to the Byzantines. That would also have, shifted the thing. The thing is, Mesopotamia is available to the Byzantines for victory points, conceivably, except they lost Babylonia because they lost control of it, so they no longer have Babylonia. So now they lose the victory points that they would get for Mesopotamia. And you can see they've also, lost all of the Orient, basically. And they're in pretty bad shape. They're almost divided. This is the one space that they control through, because they lost this probably because they intercepted from there or something. It was kind of a fuck up, I guess. Oops. Anyway, bad situation across the board. And I think, all of the Orient is now Vandal controlled because of that. Oops. It's really hard to keep in mind this sort of, I have to keep military units in places and not intercept with them. And I'm not sure that was the case, I think the interception was here, but I can't be certain. I don't remember what the fuck happened. If it was, though, that's the kind of screw up that this area control system just engenders. It's like, oh look, I have an area. Oh look, now I don't. Because it's not common that you have to keep garrisons everywhere, and because what constitutes when you don't is kind of hard to keep in my mind, at least. It's very easy to screw things up like that and just, oops, I just lost a province that maybe I wanted. It's not going to be too big a deal. Although it could end up, it could be. If it goes another turn, the loss of that province could mean that the Byzantines collapse. Right? But the loss of areas is more likely to cause their collapse. So their bonus is per area that they control, other than their home area, which they actually don't control. And that's down to 2 now. So if it does go another turn, there's a good chance the Byzantines will suffer greatly. And Red will suffer greatly because they have the most countries, I think, that are generating, they're generating the most negatives per turn, I think, for countries. You can just see the list here. Nobody else has anything like this. Minus 25, minus something. I think 10, minus 5, minus 20. Nobody else has just got so many negative countries under their control. Joy, and I get to do this twice if it goes an extra turn. The Saxons and Angles being combined, so far not that big a deal because it happened. There hasn't been a victory point turn, but now I have to figure out what areas are worth what, because they're basically worth the composite of these two divided in 2. And this is all for someone who can barely, maybe can expand 1 space. What a fucking pain. Here's the basic representation. On the bottom, where there are 2 stacked for the most part, those are points, the red and the yellow are points generated by the Saxons because the point values are different. With the exception of this upper level red one here, which is also an angle point setup. Those reds are worth 8 each. The yellows are worth less. 3 each. Okay. I kind of screwed up here because I could have used the same color for yellow and green. That's the same value. The blues are worth 7 each. And then you add these and you average them, and So it's very obvious I'd love to get here, but I'm not sure I can. I don't have a leader. I don't have a lot of power. I think probably my best move is against the Britons here and just see if I can beat them. They have a leader, though. But so do these, and the only other option is to go up against the Scots, who probably would let me have something. In addition, all the areas that have a yellow or red on them, and all the areas that have nothing, have a point for the Anglos, which means a half point for anyone, right? So I do have this, that'll be given to me. But this one is a green and a yellow. That means I'll get 3 points for each of the countries if I actually take that. And I think that's the best I can do, because this up here would be only 1.5 points. It's somewhat remarkably a success. The only real thought in the issue after finding where things were, and I may have gone into overkill with that, because I could have reasonably said, look, these are the only spaces I can get to. I could have overrun this, though. Well, I could have... No, I didn't have enough forces, right? There were 2 Britons there, yeah. So there really wasn't much I could do. It was really just looking at these 3 spaces, which one was worth the most, and take it. The question from there is, do I want to take it, or do I want to leave forces to help defend my capital? And the answer to that is clearly I do not care about my capital, because the Scots are unlikely to be able to siege it, and I can probably intercept there. So, so I went through a little too much work for that. But, it is fairly reasonable to think that you have to have the information in front of you before you move forward. All right, that puts me, I got 4 more left. None of which can do much, I hope. Lombards sieged successfully Sicily. They made an attempt here. In each case, I'm sacrificing units. I've sacrificed like 6 units. Then, after the successful siege here, submitting them, I'm back here. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're cav with a leader 5 into there. I was able to launch another siege there. So I managed to get all of Italy under my control, at least temporarily. But I gave up 6 units. This is an end of the game type move. It's the only time you would want to do this. But, there's a fair chance that I can rebuild at least a good amount of my army. I have a lot of cash, and there aren't that many units that I killed. Well, wait. Those are Epithalitates. No, I got a whole bunch of units to build. Yeah, I lost 6. But, I'm looking at it and saying, well, I'd really like the extra 10 points for taking all of Italy except for the 2 islands, which aren't clearly in Italy. Like, the only way you'd know that is through the gazetteer. Same thing with Balearia being within Spain. But I needed to get the subjugation to get those victory points, even though I control Italy still. And we're getting down to the end of the turn. It's not hard to tell right now, but the Bavarians took control of Illyria. They made a successful siege here. They were also attempting a siege here, which failed. And they beat back the Gepide forces. And then on their campaign, they went in to try to subjugate the Gepide. That would give them victory points for all kinds of territories in Danubius. That didn't work. That's a pity. It would have been, kind of a big coup. That leaves me with no one but the Byzantines left. The Byzantines don't give a shit about any of the stuff that they actually hold. Which maybe they seem to be holding more of it than they actually are. They seem to be doing pretty poorly here. This is like the height of the Hunnish invasions and the Gothic storm, where they've been driven back to Constantinople, essentially. However, there are a couple of things that aren't recorded. So I've got the reds. The reds are worth 5 points each. The yellows are worth 3 points each. But they get 3 10-point bonuses. One for Palestine. No way I'm going to be able to take that from the Vandals. I mean, I might be able to dislodge the Vandals from it somehow if I'm really lucky. I just don't have many troops. They get 10 points for Mesopotamia. I don't think I can get that either, although I'm closer, so maybe I'll try. because the Afghans don't control that. And right now, let me see. I don't know how many cities there are in Mesopotamia. There are 5 cities. Right now I have 1. They have 2. I have a second one here. If I can take Babylonia, these guys can't intercept me because they don't own it. I can actually get control for the victory points. But no, I can't. This is for total control. Yeah. So I would have to, yeah, so that's just not going to happen. Okay, so then the only thing left is 10 points for Italia, which I'm also not going to get. But that's where most of my points are. So I think that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on a naval invasion of Italy. And again, it's kind of a, well, what the hell, you know? This is, the Byzantines under this situation would not be trying to continue with Justinian's dream. The reason that they fought hard to maintain control of the islands that they had control of, you know, that they're given score for, is that they had them before, right? So again, the game is like driving you to do stupid shit that's ahistorical. Justinian's dream maybe makes some sense, right? It at least makes you do the historical thing. But from then on, your goal is to hold on to the provinces that you have, not go conquer them again, you know? Certainly things you lost, maybe you'd interject yourself again, but this concept of constantly wanting to intervene in Italy, yeah, I just don't buy it anymore, you know. They more or less left off and stayed with their southern half. They didn't keep pushing against the Lombards to try to go further north or anything like that. They tried to entrench themselves where they were, and that's why they held on to the Baleares and Sicily and Corsica and Sardinia. You know, the places they held on to, they tried to hold rather than lose. And yes, it was a major effort. Why was it a major effort? Because that's where their enemies were. Right now, their enemies are these guys. That's where their efforts should be related. The fact that there is no follow-up game, that the Byzantines have to try to hold on to, you know, this border or anything, yeah, that means who cares? Invasion die roll failed, and I am not going to try to figure out what to do, if there's anything I want to do with these guys. I really can't see anything that I particularly care about. I might give Armenia Minor up simply because it's not serving any purpose anymore. But I don't think I'm going to be launching any attacks. I found a event card that I'm going to play. I should have played it before the die roll, but I would have, this being perhaps the last turn. So actually I do get to make that invasion. 1, 2, 3. And that might get intercepted by the Lombards. How far away are they? 1, 2... yeah, that's too far away. I'm probably not going to be able to beat them, so I will stand and we'll see what happens. Lombards had their own card, a tactics card. It added a black die to battle in Campania. And so the Byzantines are going to be just sitting in Apulia at this point. But they got something, you know. Both sides basically wiped each other out, which is a rare occurrence because normally you get recovery, but there was only 1 Lombard unit there. I didn't succeed with either of the interceptions that I was trying to make into Campania. Supposedly this is supposed to happen at the end of the turn, but, well, I got to do the victory points at the end of the game, so I guess that works out. There's not a war between Persia and Byzantium on either turn, I don't think. There's no heresy markers. So, 6 or more, the game ends. Yay! That means now I just have to go on and count the victory points. Whoopee. Ouch. Everything was working just great, you know. The Byzantines got score for this. The Western Romans don't exist, so they can't get points for end of game. But then I hit the Franks. And I'm okay with the Franks so far. I've got 27 points calculated up from my scored stuff, but now I have to get 1 victory point for each 3 other provinces. And you might say, well, that's easy enough, right? Yeah, except for this. I gotta remember the ones that I've already scored. I could have just put markers in them, but again, I forgot. I forgot that that was coming, and now I'm like, oh, fuck. And we're talking about just a few points here. But it also includes things like, actually not this, I don't think. I think that's Visigoth allied. But it includes things like the Alemanni territories and the Suebi territory, which I have counted, and blah, blah, blah. And all of northern Gaul. Do I own all of southern Gaul? That's what I have to decide at this point, based on what other people have. I don't know. I don't think that makes sense, honestly, because nobody owns Southern Gaul. So that's what I'm going to do. The fact that I have subjugated nations does not give me control of Southern Gaul for the victory points. I don't think I've done that yet, but I may have with some of these other things here. But I don't know. It's just too hard to juggle. And the final turn scores, the fact that the Britons stayed on the board brings them to actually a positive value. The Franks pulled in like 32 points. That gets them up to a positive 13. We actually totaled up somehow to a positive 33. That doesn't make sense. That can't be right. I'm at minus 50. Yeah, that's wrong. That was a negative score. That it's going to be around negative 13, I think. We managed a couple of high-scoring things. The Lombards ended up getting 62 points off their territory. They did not get the 10-point bonus for all of Italy, obviously. They didn't have Apulia. And that brought them up to 82 for the turn. And the Epithalale, they ended up at a total of 46. They probably had a few points left otherwise, but that brought me to a total of 134, which is up there, right? We look at some of these others. The Vandals, or the Visigoths, actually scored these guys up to 168 on turn 9's victory point turn. And red was at 145 on turn 6. Ooh, yellow got 173. That would be the Vandals. That was their big point thing. So that was the highest of them so far. But again, we got a big scoring turn, But like in Britannia games, it's all mixed up who gets their score when, and you don't know who's winning or whatever without a really, really deep understanding of how the patterns of the scores work in the game. That's going to be hard in this game because of the randomness factors. Yeah, sure. In Britannia, the Danes might fuck up and not score, their 60 points or 40 points or whatever they're supposed to score. The Romans might screw up and not get their big 40 points on turn 1 or whatever. But they'll come close. The Danes could actually completely screw up, just because, depending on how other players play them, how other players set up to defend against them, they could get very, very few points on that turn. But in this, there's just like single die roll events that can determine, 100 points one way or another very easily. And not surprisingly, with some pretty good stuff on the board, yellow-brown got a big turn this time. Persia, hey, they're not scoring any points. Alani, hey, scored a point, whatever. But the Vandals, they got a total of 64 for the turn, most of them from territory. But most of that territory is Africa. They get like a point each for stuff along the Mediterranean. So much of what they were doing is just not valuable. It was this attempt towards empire, which looks like it was going to succeed. The Heruli scored nothing because they don't care about that one space in Italy that they're actually able to be in. The Gepidae, all they care about is Danubia. At this point, they got all their points for it. Whatever they won it before, again, is just moving towards imperial ownership. The Jutes got to 17 points. Now that's halved. They actually had 33 points for the territory that they had there. But that's pretty damn impressive, you know, for something that's subjected or subjugated. The Scots, do I have them in the right line? Yeah. The Scots got a total of 47 points. 33 of it was from this turn. I can remember that. From the turn end stuff. The rest was from becoming a kingdom, etc. They basically couldn't be denied that. I mean, the only way you could deny that to them is if you said, yellow and brown is winning, and I'm going to go beat up on the Scots for some reason. So that's pretty much an assured, like they're just going to generate the points that they generated all game, almost assuredly. The Khazars obviously are just a raider. They produced 6 for the game, which I'll go over for a little later when I add up those scores. I may not add them correctly, but I'll try my best. I'm more worried about the victory, the end game victory. And the Vikings, of course, didn't come into play. They had, you know, a random chance to come into play this turn. They would next turn, but there's a, you know, as happened, we didn't get that last turn, and the Vikings didn't show up this turn. So, hey, why are they in the game? I don't know. The Raiders are just so pathetic and useless that I have no idea what to do with them. On to the last guys, and I really gotta nuke my coffee. It's gotten pretty damn cold. Blue turned in an okay turn. The Ostrogoths ended up making up for their negative 20 that they got for being in decline. How did they do that? You know, I think I cheated. I think I gave them a score as if they were the Lombards. This is what I get for walking away. Yeah. So they were at negative 20. And they have Sicily and Benevento, and that's it. So it looks to me like they're at like negative 18 there. I got to rescore that. However, holding on to Spain, got a total of 38 points for the turn. The Burgundy basically didn't score anything. I mean, they got a couple points, but they're subjugated. Crappy. The Angles got 8 points just like the Saxons did. They split those points. The Bavarians, though, 38 points. Owning all of Illyria ended up very helpful to them. If they had subjugated the Gepidi, they wouldn't have been able to, because Gepidi have more than 3 spaces. I was thinking crazy shit. If they captured the capital, though, they would have taken these away from the Gepidi. So it was a good move. It's just, it wasn't doing anywhere near what I thought. The Avari, again, they got a total of 3 points. They're just kind of bottled up there, unable to do much. They could have gone up into the barbarian territories, but why? And that gave me a total of 70 for the turn. What does that mean now? Well, now I got to do some calculations, find myself. There's my calculator. That's the only one that works still. And just spreadsheet this out. And I want to see what each country did and what each player did, basically. I'm really lost here because I had scores for the Kasani after they had been destroyed, and I'm trying to figure that out. I added some of them into here, but I don't think they make sense. 30. This works. This, I think I counted that negative 20 twice, essentially, for the Britons. So I don't know. Let's see what we had here. 27, so I'm positive 2, which would mean this would have to be a minus 15 here. We'll see what that comes out as. Not too surprisingly, my numbers don't add up down one column across from the other, but they're kind of close. I did mark down a couple of places. I was able to resolve. I was way off here, like 30 points off or something. I was able to resolve that, and it ended up, hey, the bottom line was right. I just misread some things as I was cutting across. But for these, you know, I'm like 40 points off here. I'm 20 points off here. This one was spot on. I think 1 point off. And I don't feel like doing that resolution. I found some weird places where like the numbers down here were definitely wrong. So I don't know, but it does give a fair idea of what's going on. So our top scorer was actually the yellow player, and that probably shouldn't be surprising. I was expecting red to still be on top because of the huge amount of points they pulled in, but yellow had two countries that overperformed, I think. The Vandals did quite well, and the Gepidae did quite well. Why? Well, the Vandals, there were problems going on in the east, and the Byzantines and Persians, neither of them were really capable of standing up to them once they got down here. And, you know, Egypt was not being held by either one. So we got to expand quite a bit. For the Gepidae, well, the Huns don't exist, which is just a random chance, and yeah, within some cases, but I made it a random chance as opposed to it just automatically fails. And there really wasn't anything else to compete with them down there. I mean, the Byzantines could have beaten up on them or something, but they don't desire to. They have some reasons to go through Illyria, but whatever. The next highest was the red player. Well, I mean, and we can look at this. The Vandals produced 226 points. That was their leading thing. The Gepidae, 193. Kind of surprising. Persia pulled in 137 points. That's that 20 points a turn beating up on the Byzantines, which I kind of looked at as, was this a good idea or not, when I saw that I'm going to spend the rest of the game creating negative points with Persia. And I'm still not sure. You can kind of see, hey, we were creating about 25 to 30 points a turn for the first 6 turns, and then for the rest of the game, we were creating negative points, but it didn't just balance out, you know, unless I added completely wrong. 50, 80, 109, add another 50 or so, that puts me to, say, 160, and then here 20, 40, 50. I might be off in this numbering. That looks off, but anyway, I might have like skipped a minus 20 or something, but still, they pulled in a fair amount of points. And yeah, it's Persia. You know, I should be getting a good amount. I was a little surprised by that number. That may be the 40-point difference here. Or a big part of it is that I just misadded, probably using the calculator. I'm tired, man. I was trying to be more careful across here. So, if we take a look at Reds, well, the Byzantines scored the biggest points at 265. Probably the biggest in the game because the Vandals were the other. And then my other big score, the Franks, who I felt like weren't really doing well most of the game. You know, I don't know how they got their points, but they were positive until turn 10. That's when they started fumbling about. And, of course, the Western Romans, who aren't around for a long time, but they're around for a few turns, and then they stop scoring points and actually score negative points, but they scored some pretty damn good points during that period. There are others, the Britons, well, you have the Kasani Raiders, who are just garbage, and then you have the Britons, who probably, you know, I feel like I'm pretty lucky that I got a positive score out of them, and I'm not sure I should have. But anyway, they did well enough there. Now, the next is the blue, actually, where the Visigoths were a big leader with 170 points, and the Ostrogoths at 104. Now, the Ostrogoths were petering out at the end of the game. There's no question of that. But then below that, we're looking at, like, the Bavarians at 62. The Bavarians barely in the game, and they're the next scorer, with other countries like the Burgundians. Again, I'm lucky I got a positive score off them. That's off their early stuff. Later in the game, they start producing negative points. The worst of all is the Greens. And one would predict that because, you know, that random die roll for the Huns didn't happen. What did they do? Well, the Alemanni were a failure with negative total points. I think the only country with negative total points. My only big score, the Efathalake and the Lombardi, both got in the low hundreds, which isn't bad, except I had a bunch of things. I have a bunch of Raiders who just aren't going to produce a lot of points. This is about right, 4, 3, 5. I have the Saxons. Oh, I don't feel like, they didn't do terribly badly. They were subjugated and shit, but whatever. The Swebi, who like the Alemanni, failed. They got stuck inside Frank territory. And I'll tell you the truth, if the Swebi had and the Alani and stuff had been able to get down to Spain, that would take points away from the Visigoths, the blue player, who's not winning the game, but make their own cases a little bit better. I don't know what you can say, there are certain factors that I think influence the game. The movement of the barbarians, that extra move, I think should have been that the modifications to the rules suggested, and that I kind of resisted and didn't play with. They might have helped shake things up a little bit more, make the Romans a little weaker, and get through there. That might have had an influence on, say, the Vandals and Visigoths doing so well. The only thing that affected the Gepidae is whether the Huns are there or not. And, that's kind of like a crapshoot, right? Green, who knows how many points Green lost for that. I don't know what the Huns can produce, but they are the Green player's main thing. Hold on. Points are very similar to the Gepidae's points, to tell you the truth. They're kind of interested in the Danubian region. Yeah, they might make more points. 3 points for each province in Danubius, 5 points for each province outside Danubius, and an extra 10-point bonus there. And, we could almost see that the Gepidae, who made 193 points, we could easily see 100 points of that being taken away and given to Green. That's not enough to swing this. But again, we also had the bonus of the Vandals getting down here. And nobody else is really interested in Africa, though, until the Byzantines. And that may have all been triggered by something this player had control over. The Persians beating the living crap out of the Byzantines and just keeping them, their force pool low. Yes, they destroyed the Persians, but what they gained out of it is pretty big in terms of making the Vandals potent. Another option, of course, is if the Persians end up winning down here somehow, which the game is capable of handling. But yeah, you can have these major effects in terms of one country making it very possible for another one to do very well. And you see that in the Britannia-style games, but I don't think to the same extent that you see it here. In the real Britannia-type games, you got a pile of pieces, and you pretty much see a certain type of game evolve. And yes, the players can do things to change how that overall strategy works. And that's the kind of thing where the Persians could beat up the Byzantines to make room for the for the Vandals. But what you wouldn't see is the Persians win that war, right? The Byzantines would just have enough troops that you could almost guarantee that they wouldn't. This game is random enough that between the event cards, etc., you could see the tenor of that war change significantly. And then there's just these hugely random events, The siege of a particular city could just change the course of the game significantly. The Byzantines could be put so much on the ropes that they can collapse, and that could, it's an unlikely thing to happen, but it could have happened in the last turn of the game, actually. But prior to that, Could they be beaten up enough? Could they end up drawing some bad cards and being in decline and having lost enough provinces that their income is low? That's the whole thing, is you can really like see incredible amounts of variance in the game. And I like that about it, to tell you the truth. But what it means is this is not the type of competitive game that the Britannia series has, you know. and Hispania is kind of the one exception to that, because it's a fucking bloody mess as well. But this takes that a step further. Wow. I just, you know, I don't think this game, I think this game does not subject itself to a lot of analysis in terms of what you can do strategy-wise. I think the move with the Persians was an interesting move, and I think I can see some side effects to it that I wasn't expecting. Is that what you want to do with the Persians? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. What about other effects? And then I'm so bothered by some of the things that just felt like it's not going to flow. You know, it's not going to flow particularly. It's trying to shoehorn you into the history, where I don't feel like that's the intent that the game should have. That whole concept of, hey, if we're paying this much detailed attention to how the peoples are moving and everything, and to give this kind of insight into it, we should be giving insight into why they're moving where they're going. And that is not covered by the game. And indeed, it could be covered better by a more Britannia style game, where there are, you know, population all over everywhere, instead of dealing with these military units which don't really reflect broad population movements. I don't know. I got a big job of cleanup to do. And I mean, yeah. I mean, the randomness of these things, where you can't really predict which pile to draw from, you know, is spending 20 or 30 bucks on a reform thing worth worth the advantage that you might get in terms of aging? I don't know. You know, it's just, you might get a good draw on the passive, you might get a shitty draw on the reform, and when you start screwing with your economics, if you don't have huge excess money, you're asking for it, because it's the bankruptcy that brings the empire down. And bankruptcy isn't good for kingdoms either. It can turn a kingdom from kind of something vibrant into, you know, a one-space kingdom that's now not going to bring you, it's just going to bring you negative points for the rest of the game, basically. So yeah, I don't know. You know, I mean, you take such gambles on so many of the cards that can definitely affect your score, but they can also really significantly affect how the board develops and how it evolves. And so much of the game just feels so wrong that I'm left here, like, part of me does want to play it out of this sort of morbid curiosity, if I can try to figure out what it's trying to fucking show. Is it trying to show what I think it is, in which case it's doing it wrong? Or am I blind to what it's trying to show? You know? And yeah, I will be back with a review after I do this big cleanup job. Not tonight, probably tomorrow. And before I get to anything terribly big, we should be doing something along the same lines as this, but a lot smaller. Although it's got a reputation for bad rolls.